Good evening, and thank you for attending. My name is Leslie Kane, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. Before we begin, please silence all phones and electronic devices. Additionally, please refrain from any interruptions to this debate, as it is being recorded for on-demand viewing and post-captioning services. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor for this evening's event. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and public education measure initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. The system provides clean funding for qualified participating candidates who agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. These include contribution and spending limits, foregoing special interest money, and participating in commission debates. We encourage audience questions, so please utilize the note card given to you when you entered the room and hold it up. Our volunteers will pick up the cards and deliver them to me. If you need additional cards, just raise your hand. If you have a question for a specific candidate, please include the candidate's name on the note card. It will be considered during the second half of the debate. We do screen questions for clarity, to eliminate duplications, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. The debate is scheduled for up to 90 minutes, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight's debate includes 1-minute opening statements. The first half of the debate begins with 2 minutes to each candidate to answer the same question. After all candidates have responded to the question, the first responding candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds, and we will rotate which candidate responds first. The second half will allow a different question per candidate with 1 minute to answer, and then we will have 1-minute closing statements. We ask that you remain polite to all of the candidates and give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing. No matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with anything being said tonight. Tonight's participants are Mr. Mark Finchem, Republican Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 11. Ms. Hollis Lyon, Democratic candidate for State Representative, District 11. Mr. Barry McCain, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 11. Ms. Marcela Quiros, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 11. And Mr. Brett Roberts, Republican candidate for State Representative, District 11. The order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name, and will progress from that starting point, beginning with opening comments. The order for the second half will be determined by reverse alphabetical order by last name. So with that being said, Mr. Finchem, will you start the opening remarks, please?
Thank you very much. Over the last 4 years, we have been very successful in creating a structurally balanced budget. When I came into office 4 years ago, frankly, our state finances were a mess. Part of that had to do with overspending. A lot of that had to do with an economic downturn everybody calls the Great Recession, in which the state of Arizona lost 30% of its net wealth. That required a lot of sacrifice on the part of many people. We are now finally back to where Arizona was at the time that the Great Recession started. But we still have a lot of work to do, including paying off $1.1 billion in unfunded pension mandates and paying off our mortgaged state buildings.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon.
Well, good evening, and thank you to Clean Elections for this opportunity tonight. Again, my name is Hollis Lyon, and I really love this country. I was that child who teared up at the national anthem at school rallies in the auditorium. And I ended up serving 26 years in the Air Force all over the country and at NATO headquarters in Europe, where I managed the NATO nuclear planning system. Arizona was my home base that entire time because my parents had moved here back when I was in college. So I'd been visiting my parents, and I'd seen that Arizona was a state that put people first. When I finally retired as a colonel, I settled here to take care of my mom after my dad passed away. I'm running because I don't think our legislature is working the people's priorities. Arizonans want their government to work for them, and they want real fiscal responsibility, and they want to get what they're paying for. It's time that we paid for education, and we fixed our roads and some other things, and I'm a proven leader, so I can be a public servant. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCain.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Clean Elections. Court yesterday was interesting. My name is Barry McCain. I'm a candidate for the House of Representatives because after years of listening to what everyone has to say, I felt that this legislature has been misrepresenting us. I feel that we have missed a lot of opportunities. Yes, education is important. I can't seem to get away from teachers. My grandma's a teacher, my mom's a teacher, and both my kids are teachers. But there's things we need to do, being on the Transportation and Water Committee. I've watched our voters not be listened to and heard. I believe that the only way we're going to turn this around, democracy's in the balance, is for us to work together and not talk at each other, but talk with each other. And it starts with listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Why don't we treat it that way? If you have, Plato said that wise men talk because they have something to say.
Ms. Quiroz.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here, especially our teachers that are out in the audience. Sorry. I decided to run for state representative of District 11. That's where I live. That's where I teach. I stayed up all night listening to the last budget debate, distraught, and I finally decided to stand up and run. My husband and I moved here from California in 2006. I didn't mind the pay cut as an educator. We were ready to buy a house, and that's what drew us to Arizona. But as the budget cuts came, that's where we felt it the most. I remember sitting through budget committees, meetings after meetings, deciding whether or not we're going to cut after-school buses or cut all-day kindergarten, or are we going to cut future pay raises for teachers. So that was my motivation for getting involved this year. So on April 28th, I decided to run. I'm still teaching. I'm optimistic that no matter what happens in this debate and this election, people are listening to teachers now, and that was first and foremost my concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out to hear us, and thank you, Clean Elections, for putting on this debate. My name's Brett Roberts. I am running for the House of Representatives in LD 11, and I'm doing so because I think that the ship has been corrected, and it's now moving in the right path, and we need to make sure that it needs to continue to move in that path. We have a lot of things that are working out well. Our unemployment rates at the lowest in 10 years, and so we have things like that are moving along, and we need to make sure that we continue at that pace. Education is extremely important, and I think that a lot of us care about education. I think where we differ is how we need to get there to fund it, and I think that that it can be worked out. That's pretty much what I had. Thanks.
Thank you. At this time, we'll begin the portion of the debate where each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the same question. The first question is for Ms. Lyon. Ms. Lyon, what are your priorities for District 11?
Well, I would like to see, first and foremost, I want to see schools funded. I have, in my district, in District 11, we've had 2 districts that turned away their overrides 2 years ago because the localities, the people in those neighborhoods could not afford the money increases, the tax increases. So that would be number one. Education was funded years ago the same way it's becoming funded today. and that is to push all the requirements back down to the communities and the localities. And that wasn't fair, so it was fixed, and now we're going back to it. Our roads need to be fixed. It's about time that we fix something besides just a few of the state highways. There are roads that I know that I've had to replace 3 windshields since I've lived here because the roads aren't good, and axles and that kind of stuff. So those are 2 of my priorities for the district. And as I walk around and talk to people at doors, then I hear a lot of what people care about. They want their personal liberties restored in terms of they want to feel as if they are getting what they pay for. The government is fully accountable. I think the teachers felt that when they went up to the legislature and stayed with the legislature all night long in the middle of the night and watched as most of the legislators tried to wait the teachers out and didn't manage to do that. And that was because they didn't want to fund public education. Those are the kinds of things. I remember Mr. Leach saying in a debate or in a discussion 4 years ago that the budget shouldn't be passed in the middle of the night. And what have they been doing? Trying to pass the budget in the middle of the night. So all of those things, accountability, fiscal responsibility, and protecting our communities, and also funding retirement systems, all of those things need to be done for the people of our district.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, same question.
Well, my priorities first is voters. As a military man, a career in military, I learned a lot of leadership. Leadership is based like trust on action and not on position nor self-gain. Education, without a doubt, is important. They have not funded it. They've defunded it from the time that Prop 301 was passed in 2000. We went through a recession that was unnecessary. We're still trying to bounce back from it. The next thing we have to do is over-criminalization of the justice system, because instead of us getting a fine, they want to put a felony, so now you can't vote. I think that's outrageous. Water, which I've been doing for 7 years. Of course, water conservation. We have people from the Middle East learning from us. We can turn this thing around with the technologies. Transportation, of course, they cut HERF funds constantly. Housing is important, because how are we going to stop homeless people who can't get a job and afford to pay house? So that's where Section 8 comes in, that they've destroyed. And the last thing, of course, my veterans. Of course, I'm a veterans for Arizona Veterans with Disabilities. I'm a lobbyist for them, and I feel that we need to focus on our voters. The voters are the ones that are going to elect us, and we need to represent them, not a personal gain. Corporations don't have two ears and a mouth, but yet we do. So why should they have our voting rights? There's so many things I'm watching done at this legislature. I've been there 3 days a week for the last 4 years. That is against you, and you are the main reason why we have a country. Empathy builds communities. Communities build country. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, same question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. The question is, what are your priorities for District 11?
Well, my first priority is, if I make it through the general election, and if and when I do, is to fully fund education and make sure that they don't touch it again. And if our economy's back, all that 30% we lost, if it's in fact back, then where are our 2008 budget? That's my question. So I'd really like to see education be back to, 10 years ago, with my 2 advanced degrees and 16 years in education, I'd be making $10,000 more than I'm making now. So I think that speaks for itself. So if the economy is back, then we need to fully fund education and not touch it ever again, unless it's to increase. So that's my first concern. The second one for District 11 is to bring some more of those big business into Pinal County and down south of Phoenix. I think we need a little bit more of that down there, and clean energy. We need to be in the business of selling sunshine in our state and leaving something for our grandchildren. I think our pollution issues, our energy issues, we need to stop supporting these utility companies and start taking care of those generations to come.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
Yes, my priorities for District 11 and in reality for the state of Arizona, because yes, we'll represent the constituents in District 11, but we also make decisions that affect the entire state, would be one, economy and essentially jobs. And, basically economy is the number one thing because, like I said before, we've got things turned around and we're moving in the right direction. So we got to make sure that our economy continues in the direction that it's in. We were recently ranked 5th in the nation for economic motivation. We were ranked recently 6th for income increasing throughout the nation. And I think that's a priority, and we need to make sure that we put things in place that are not going to dissuade that momentum that we have going on right now. We have people moving to Arizona. They're voting with their feet. They're voting to come here because they're leaving places like California and Illinois because the cost of living and the cost of doing business in those states is way too expensive. So they're leaving those states. And they're leaving those states because they want to come here so they can, have more money in their pocket. And if we continue to reach into people's pockets to do things that we can accomplish otherwise, I believe we can pay for education in another manner. I think we need to get the federal lands that are controlled, that we have no control over. We need to broaden our tax base in that manner rather than reaching into people's pockets and taking money out of their pockets to pay for education. Like I said before, I think we all care about education, at least the majority of us do. It's how we need to get there to pay for it. And I think that's the solution rather than increasing taxes. And by the way, the 20 for 20 plan fully funds education back to the 2008 levels.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham.
Thank you, ma'am. When it comes to priorities, they're not my priorities. They're the priorities of the hundreds of people that I've talked to while I've knocked on doors. Democrat, Independent, Greens, unregistered folks, as well as Republicans. And those boil down to 4 fundamental things: personal freedom, economic security, quality education, and a debt-free future. Those are the same things over the last 4 years that people have asked me about. And they're not the same doors that I've knocked on. They are other people many of them I have not met before. So when it comes to talking about personal freedom, folks have this feeling that the government continues to tell them what to do, how to live their life, what they can and can't do with their property, where they can go. Everything about what they do is taxed. And they've pushed back and they've said, look, enough is enough. That's why we passed Prop 108 years ago. We're sick and tired of being taxed to death. So when we talk about the money that has been spent over the last 4 years, I'd like to remind everybody that we've actually increased K-12 funding by $2.7 billion. What that means is an increase in what the state is writing a check for that both restores and increases funding. We've brought 300 large job-creating companies to Arizona. They're coming here for a reason. We now have 132 U-Haul trucks a day, and this is confirmed by U-Haul. 132 U-Haul trucks a day are coming to Arizona and being turned in because people are moving here. Arizona is a tax refugee state because we have got policies that are growing our base. It's growing the number of people who can actually create jobs. It's growing the number of people who are employed. It's not about rooftops. And by the way, rooftops does not equal increased TPT, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, your 30-second response?
Sure. I agree with several things that were said here today. I think that business is extremely important, but I don't think it's so important that it takes priority over the people. And basically what it comes down to is business is only good if it provides a commodity or a service or something that's good for the people, it provides jobs, et cetera. And when we're giving away 1.5 times as many corporate tax loopholes as we are spending in our budget, there's something out of balance with that. So we need to put that money back into our budget and spend it on the right things.
Thank you. Next question, candidates. What is your position on junk insurance flowing back into Arizona and the idea of having more than one insurance carrier on the ACA exchange? And that would be Mr. McCain, please.
Speaking of insurance, in Pinal County, we only have one. We need competition amongst insurance companies to keep them honest. We need them to be accountable. They're not. And medical is affected because the fact that we are poor in insurance. But it has to be cost effective. It's not. It's totally irresponsible. So if we want to have good medical, we have to have something more than one company. Without insurance, how are we going to take care of the workers when they get harmed, when they get hurt? And the cost is just there's no control here. We have Medicare and Medicaid. Both are government programs. Medicaid also has state programs in it, but they keep defunding it. So if we want for us to be able to work and to be able to enjoy life, and I want it where we can live, work, and play in Pinal County in particular. I have $80 billion worth of projects, and yet I've got to worry about somebody getting hurt and being able to afford it. To get these properties built is we have not enough people who can work in the building trades to bring these projects to Pinal County, and that makes all the difference on the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't get the beginning.
Yes. What is your position on junk insurance flowing back into Arizona and the idea of having more than one insurance carrier on the ACA exchange?
Junk insurance. Okay. So this isn't a topic I know entirely a lot about. I'm going to be honest. The only thing I understand is that it's really expensive for teachers, so expensive that we have teachers who qualify for access, and that needs to change. We need to make sure that they're not making decisions about their health care opposed to buying things for their classrooms or their daily their mortgage, and paying for a medical need. So if competition's the answer, then maybe that's the answer. Consolidating districts, if that's the answer, then that must be something we need to explore.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts?
So I guess I'm a little confused as far as what you're referring to as far as junk insurance. I had a conversation with someone from Blue Cross Blue Shield a while back, and I was informed that the Affordable Care Act drove out healthcare insurance as far as more than one carrier. All the other carriers were driven out of the state because they couldn't afford to stay in business, and that was the one that was left. So I'm not sure what junk type of insurance they're referring to. You know, insurance is something that when you have a need for a type of insurance, you know, I just bought a new truck and I bought insurance to cover the truck. So, I mean, I'm not sure what kind of insurance they're referring to as far as junk insurance. So I'd need more details on that question.
Okay. Thank you. And perhaps you can... This was, we'll move on. Mr. Fincham,
Thank you.
would you like to take a swing at the question?
So if we want to talk about junk insurance, I guess I'll frame it this way. I was stunned that the very people who could not operate the VA were entrusted with 1/6 of the American economy, our insurance. That just was stunning to me, that you would put an incompetent organization in charge of something that was so important. And then when you listen to Mr. Gruber, who designed this grand scheme, which quite frankly enriched a lot of insurance companies, when you hear him say that it was actually designed to fail in order to usher in single payer, that's exactly what happened. He's on video talking about how to do it. That's stunning to me. Now, when we look at insurance, we're talking about health coverage. There are a number of opportunities for us to be innovative. I mean, we've got Arizona as the 48th state, lower 48. We're the youngest state, but we seem to come up with some of the best ideas in the nation. Like, how about we compete across state lines for the purchase of insurance that's meaningful? I don't need to have child-dependent care. Why not have insurance policies that actually cover the things that I need? I'm going to be in elder care probably 15, 20 years from now. How about I have insurance for that? So I think we have to get out of, the government needs to get out of the insurance business, quite frankly. I think where we need to go is free market solutions. We have employers who have developed ideas around having a contract physician for that employer. Direct care, 40% of your healthcare dollar goes into the pocket of insurance companies. Now, I'm not vilifying insurance companies, but I think that's excessive.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon.
Well, I'm kind of in the boat with a lot of the people here. I can only guess at what junk insurance is because of the word, but I'll tell you this, that's why we have government, to make sure that we don't have the citizens out there in the marketplace trying to buy things that that are just going to defraud them. So that's one of the reasons. The ACA is not an Arizona or an LD11 vehicle. It doesn't belong here, but I have watched many of my friends, and I live in Saddlebrook, and a lot of people think everybody in Saddlebrook is well off, and that's just not true. A lot of them are on the ACA, and when we got down to only one provider, it's been very, very difficult. There is no competition. So that brings up the point. Why isn't there competition in this wonderful scheme of a competitive marketplace? Why is it that everybody else had to leave? I kind of like the idea of being able to take your insurance and go to another state. I think that's a wonderful idea. They called it backpack insurance. That's great. But why is it that you can't just buy the medical insurance that you want and not everything else? Because if that's what everybody did, then about a third of the people in the country would not be buying medical insurance, because I know when I was 30 years old, I didn't think I was ever going to be hurt. I didn't think I would ever need medical insurance. And that's just not true. So that's why the ACA pushed everybody into the marketplace. Why it all failed, I can't really figure out, but I know that it's been chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at the federal level, to the point that it just doesn't work anymore. And it needs to be fixed. We need basic health insurance for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, your 30-second response.
Well, my cousin, Senator McCain, if it wasn't the fact that he's terminal, he wouldn't stood up for us. I'm so thankful to be a McCain for that reason. It's something that if we don't get a handle on it, we're going to lose it, because we can't keep people working without insurance. We can't have just one person, one company to go to, and you think it's going to be accountable. It's not going to be affordable. It's going to be a train wreck. So I'm thankful for the insurance we get as a Vietnam vet.
Thank you.
I got hurt.
Next question. Ms. Quiros, what is your position on Prop 305, and how can you ensure equity in how tax credits are distributed among private or public school students?
Well, I don't support it. I'll be voting no. No more ESAs, no more expansion of vouchers. In fact, we need to maybe take some back if they're not being transparent. So I really feel strongly about that. I'm a public school teacher. My oldest graduated. I have a kid that graduated high school, and he graduated from public school, and I believe in public school. I am a product of a public school bilingual program, and my 10-year-old is in public school now. So there are some charter schools out there. I did work for one for a while. I think they start out with good intentions, but we could start a charter school, everyone in this room, and we can put all that money we get in an ATM card and pay the teachers what we decide. and I'm not okay with that. So there are some individuals out there making some big bucks off the backs of their students and hardworking teachers, because I know how hard they work. I was one of those teachers working for a charter at one point. So I think we need to make sure that they're being accountable for every penny they spend, and again, taking maybe some measurements to backtrack some of that, but no more from this point on, and if I'm elected.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
Yes. Well, I'm a supporter of ESAs. I believe in the free market, and I believe that it boils down to the free market. If it's good for the insurance companies, why is it not good for education? If you have a free market, it breeds competition, and competition breeds newer ways to teach. And if you have the private sector versus the public sector competing with one another to develop the best ways to educate students, then that's ultimately at some point going to trickle down into the student as far as being able to educate the student in the best manner possible. If you have those two things competing with each other, I'm a believer in small government, but at the same time, I believe that you should have checks and balances. And what I do for a living right now, I'm currently an elected constable, and we have private process servers, and we have people that are constables. So you have the government side and you have the private side. If the government side wasn't there, because our fees are regulated by the state legislature, if we were not there, then you would have the public sector be able to charge whatever they want to charge in order for people to get their court papers served. That same concept applies in education. So if you have both sides working in competition, it's going to ultimately benefit the student in the long run. That's the way I see it.
Thank you. And I'd like to briefly remind the audience to hold your applause so that the candidates can hear one another as well as respond to the questions accordingly. Mr. Fincham.
Thank you, ma'am. I have not yet taken a position on Prop 305. I'm conflicted. There are a couple of different arguments, both pro and con, and I think it's a very important issue that needs to be carefully deliberated. So be very transparent. I have not yet taken a position on it. But one thing that I can say is that this tracks back to one of the 4 critical priorities that taxpayers have told me, that voters have told me matters to them, and that's quality education. Quality education. So I hear terms like siphoning off money from public schools, and I hear terms like that, and frankly, they're hyperbole, because if that's truly the case, then would we do away with the VA, or I'm sorry, with the GI Bill? Would we do away with Pell Grants? Because the argument is that money shouldn't, that's government money, that's taxpayer money, and it shouldn't be spent at private institutions. It shouldn't be spent at charter institutions. Well, it's the same thing, just like ACCHS. That's government money that is being spent at private providers. So I think the focus needs to be on quality education, not just public or private. I'm an advocate of having the right fit for the right reason. That's parental authority. And I have not yet met a voter, not one, when I ask them, would you be willing to cede your parental authority over to a government bureaucrat? Every single person has said, no way, I want to retain my authority as a parent to choose the education that's a right fit for my child.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon.
Well, I am against 305. I will vote no on it. And 305, strangely enough, is the law being now referred to the people that the legislature, and I will say people in this room, actually voted for when it was a law in the legislature. And it is now being referred over to the people, the public, to vote on as it was. So to say that, Mr. Fincham, to say that he didn't vote for it, he really did already vote for it. Now, it's coming back. It's coming back to all the people to vote for, because ESAs actually do, if we expand them, according to this law, they will take money out of those public schools. And the problem with that, I mean, a lot of the public schools in our district are shrinking and shrinking because I hear over and over again declining enrollment. and the schools get paid per child. And so why is the enrollment declining? Because because parents are being fooled into thinking that they can take their money and go someplace else with it and get just as good an education. And then they get there, and sometimes the school says, I'm sorry, but unless your parents are willing to put 4 or 8 hours a week into the school, then your student will have to leave. Or unless you're able to chip in $1,500 more, then your student will have to leave. On the 101st day, when that money now stays where it started, i.e. the charter school or the private school, now they do something to force the child to go back to the public school, and the public school doesn't get any funding for the rest of the year for that child. That's why we don't want to expand them. I think ESA started off just fine. They were serving a needed market. They were wonderful. I'm all for school choice, but we don't need to expand them. They've already covered that market.
Thank you. Mr. McCain.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm glad that you're conflicted on this. I see it as a no-brainer. Both my kids are teachers. My son is saying both of them have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree and certified teachers. But my son's saying, Dad, I can't afford teaching when I'm losing too much money. When we talk about vouchers, my mom being a teacher, I know public education, you have a teacher's plan. You have to go along with state statute. In order to satisfy state statute, you can go to a charter school and you can put the money out there, but the problem about this is you can't go to college because they're following after money and not after state statute to make sure that you're qualified. And my kids, like my mom and my grandmother, worked very hard for their students to be able to go to college. Now that's not even affordable. But when we talk about vouchers, they got to take money from our public education, and we don't know who our Einstein's coming from, whether they're in a charter school or public education. But public education guarantees you can go to college because it follows state statute and not a dollar bill. There's no question about that. So I'm glad that you are conflicted. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, your 30-second response?
Well, I just wanted to be clear on Prop 305. Prop 305 is not necessarily going to benefit our local charter schools. In Maricopa, one that I actually worked for was Pathway. What this implies is they're going to give money to private schools. There's no private school in Maricopa. My kids won't benefit from it. I would have to send them somewhere in Casa Grande or go south more, or maybe go up into Phoenix. But it's not just for regular charter schools. They're implying that parents who choose to take their kids into private schools get funding. That funding goes with their kid to that private school. And I'm not in agreement with that. So this is not just about vouchers for charter schools.
Thank you. Next question for Mr. Roberts. What are your plans to fund public education?
Well, as I stated earlier, I believe that, again, most everyone here and elsewhere cares about education. It's a very important factor. I wrote an op-ed on it in 2016 when one of the 3 schools in LD11, as far as public schools, the 3 larger ones I think that Ms. Lyon was referring to, we actually got an override passed. And I was an integral part of that. I attended probably close to 50 meetings in order to get that override passed, because I do believe education is an important factor. But like I said before, I think we just disagree on how to get there. And other than the fact that the 20 for 20 has essentially got us to where we're at in 2008 funding, there is a tremendous amount of funds available if we, again, go back and get the lands that we were promised when Arizona was made a state. We only have approximately, I think it's 24%, I've heard people say 17 to 24%, somewhere in there, that we should be able to broaden our tax base on. If we get that land and we're able to expand our tax base, we'll have money for education, we'll have money for roads, we'll have money for police, fire, we'll have enough money. I mean, Eventually, we'll probably get back to the same point, but we will have the funds that are needed if we expand our tax base by getting that land. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham?
Thank you very much. I'd first like to correct Colonel Lyon. I did not say I did not vote for the bill. I said that I'm conflicted about the current vote on Prop 305. Now, with that corrected, I'm of the same mind that you can only grow tax revenue one of two ways. You can either grow rate, which is vertical, or you can grow base. There are no other ways to do that. It's a mathematical certainty. So let's take just a trip through BLM land for a moment. The BLM manages roughly 24% of the state of Arizona. Much of that land is under current land use lease. Guess where that money goes? Washington, D.C. When we became a state on February 14th, 1912, we were told by the federal government that we would have equal footing with our sister states. So when we look at states like New York, for example, New York has 97% of its land either in private hands or in tax base. It's tax generating. Arizona, 16%. New York is able to fund their kids at $19,755 per child per year. That's because the tax base revenue that is generated stays in their state. So I would favor, in fact, I've already engaged with Secretary Zinke about this idea, where the state of Arizona would begin moving some of the management responsibilities from BLM to the state of Arizona. And that revenue that's generated, instead of it going off to Washington, D.C., stays in the state of Arizona. That money was promised to us. Its lost economic opportunity cost of roughly $300 billion over the last 15 years. That's the money that is due our kids. And by the way, that's every single year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon?
I think I've lost the bubble on what the question is.
What are your plans to fund public education?
Okay. Well, first of all, I said before that that we are giving away 1.5 times in tax loopholes. Am I doing okay, guys? Okay. 1.5 times in tax loopholes as our entire budget. We give over $13 billion a year in tax loopholes to big companies, many of which are not even housed or homed in Arizona. So that money that we're giving them doesn't necessarily even come back to us. And our entire state budget is under $10 billion. So I would, and oh, by the way, many of those, if not all of them, have been accumulating for decades. And we don't go back and review whether or not those tax loopholes are giving us a return on investment. I belong to 5 chambers of commerce. I am totally in sync with, if you want to put it that way, tax incentives, because we need to incentivize the kind of behavior that we want. But we need to go back and ensure that anything that we give away is giving us a return on our investment, and we're not just throwing it down the drain. We have gotten to the point where we could probably get rid of, I don't know, $1 or $2 billion of those things that we gave away in 1990 and 1992 and those kinds of times, 30 years ago almost. Let's go get that money. Let's have a bipartisan commission that looks at all those tax loopholes and figures out which ones we can cut and bring that money back into our system. That would not only, a couple billion of the $13.7 billion would not only fund our schools, it would fund our roads, it would fund a lot of things we need. And if it's not giving us a return on our investment right now, then it's basically a wash. It's just money coming in.
Thank you. Mr. McCain?
Please repeat the question.
Absolutely. What are your plans to fund public education?
As a military man, I get right to the chase. The unaccountability loopholes that they've done, for example, $1 billion to Peabody mining, because they can't be accountable, but they won't do that in solar and they won't do it in wind technology. We use our technology, use our data properly, then we'll be fine. But you can't just give away money that until we become accountable on the budget, and I did the budget for Pinal County as well as Eloy, we're gonna have the same problem. Eloy's got more people, but it's because they got more prisoners, not because they got more people. You know, stop the loopholes. Let's be transparent. Let's follow our democratic values, and we will be able to fund education. But education's taking a hit. They make it sound like sound bites. It's called frame the message instead of address the issue and find a solution. As a military man, it's pretty simple. The unaccountability in our legislature, they're giving away money that they have no business. It's your money. Why should they give your money away and not give you anything for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz.
Well, I have to say, agree with everyone so far. I think we need to stop those loopholes. We need to stop and maybe open up the books and look at what they were paying before. What were they comfortable paying in 1990 and 1994 before Jan Brewer started really making those corporate tax cuts and making sure that we get them back, because at one point they were comfortable and they were here. So I don't agree with that fear that they're going to leave. I don't think they're going to leave. I think they're here, they're comfortable, they like Arizona, and these corporations aren't going to leave. But another thing, maybe it was around 1 o'clock in the morning that I heard someone bring up during the budget debate, why did we only have, I think, 4 budget auditors at one point? And then I think they increased them to maybe, was it 10 or 12? I'm not sure what the number is, but how do we only have that many for the whole state? We need to bring back some more of these corporate auditors and make sure that everyone's paying their fair share.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
I'd just like to address one of the points as far as if we don't fear that we have corporations that are going to leave the state of Arizona because we want to get rid of the said loopholes. One of the things that we should fear is that corporations really don't essentially pay taxes. They collect taxes. So if you go raising corporations' taxes, those taxes, that increase is just going to end up coming out of our pockets, because whatever service or product that they sell, that increase is going to end up going into the price of that service or product. So we're going to end up paying it. So in reality, you're raising taxes.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to transition to the second part of the debate, where each candidate will receive a separate question with 1 minute to respond. Remember, you may still submit questions via note cards and direct them to specific candidates. One moment. The first question is for Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, what is your position on private prisons or prisons as an industry?
Well, I have a little bit of experience in the prison industry. I was a detention officer for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for a little over 3 years. As far as private prisons, you know, if we can save money in private prisons, I don't have a problem with it. One of the things right now bringing up prisons as far as correctional officers is another aspect in our state that hasn't received raises in a good number of years. So I guarantee you if they walked out, somebody would have an issue.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, how can Arizona capitalize on solar energy?
Well, we can sell it. I mean, we can, as it is, we barter with our neighboring states when we're not using as much for our air conditioning in the winter months. But if we can do something like that for even our water resources, which is going to be a hot topic coming up if you haven't already started hearing about water issues, I think it's something we need to capitalize on. And whether my conscience would be clear today if even the utilities companies decided to sell me solar energy. But I think we, as to be responsible for our grandchildren, we need to. But I did want to address the fear-mongering about the corporations leaving too. They thought the same thing would happen when we raised minimum wage, and we just said the economy was up. So that didn't happen even to small businesses. So I don't believe that.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, What is your plan to ensure that Arizona has enough clean water to support future residential and commercial expansion?
First of all, stop giving it to California. The Colorado River is in Arizona more than it is California. In 1968, they guaranteed they can have all the water they want, but yet they've got an ocean, and they want to use our water instead of desalt, which we got desaltification, United States Navy. We know how to do that. They don't want to address the water situation. We have technology right now that we can make precipitation and use this. There's ways we can use technology with electronic engineering technology and computer information systems, my first 2 degrees. I know for a fact we can improve our water situation. We're leading the country and the world right now.
Thank you.
Conservation.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, share with us about your experience in negotiations.
Oh, sure. I was actually the NATO nuclear planning system manager when I worked at headquarters NATO. And Turkey and Greece famously don't get along. And when I was trying to figure out how to get this deployed across all of the countries in NATO so that we could move, the Brits and the Americans could move nuclear weapons around in Europe, they're very, very tight protocols. The planning system was supposed to be a closed computer network. And basically, the 2 countries did not want to let the other country have access to that network without each other. So what we ended up having to do was get them together, figure it out. I did a little shuttle diplomacy to start with, and then I sat down with them, and then I put them in a room and let them sit down, and we ended up with a system that everybody agreed with so that we could plan on how to move our nukes around in Europe. I also, time over, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham, please tell us how you would prevent weapons from falling into the wrong hands.
Well, thank you for the question. If I had a crystal ball, I might be able to predict who is going to act out.
And specifically, if I may, how would you, in this scenario, how would you prevent a convicted domestic abuser from buying an assault rifle at a gun show?
Okay, so that's a different question. Is this 2 questions at the same time, or?
That is the question.
Okay, give me the whole question if you would.
How would you prevent a convicted domestic abuser from buying an assault rifle at a gun show?
So they're already prohibited from buying one at a gun show. Now, as far as private party, if they're outside of the gun show, that's a private party sale. And currently, the courts have said we don't have any authority there. So Heller versus DC was very clear about who can own a gun and just how far the government can go to restrict things. Now, when we talk about gun shows, there are already flags and restrictions through a number of different law enforcement computer systems that cross-reference those individuals who have been convicted of felonies, those people who have been involved in domestic violence. Quite frankly, I, as a 21-year public safety officer in West Michigan, I could never understand why the courts would quickly release somebody who is involved in domestic assault and put them right back out on the street. Didn't make any sense to me, because 3 hours later I was back at the house arbitrating the same fight. So I'm not sure what we can do about the courts. We've got this thing called separation of powers. And I'm out of time.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, what is your position on a woman's right to choose?
Well, I'm a Christian. I assume you're referring to the pro-life, and I don't feel that a woman has the right to choose to destroy the life of another person. And I guess where the debate lies is, when does the infant become another person? I'm against abortion, and I'm pro-life. That's where I stand on it.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, what is your what is your position, or what are your feelings about in terms of trusting the GOP to fully fund public education beyond the 2019 budget?
I I think it's something we need to pay attention to, and that's why I decided to run, because I didn't trust them to do it. So I guess that's my answer, is I don't trust that it will happen. I think they know we're listening now. I think they woke a sleeping giant. But I don't know that they're going, like you said, they were passing the budget in the middle of the night. They were making decisions at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And that seems very, I guess, like my kids would say, shady. You know, we need to put things out in the open, and I don't think that they would continue to do it.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, what in your background or experience qualifies you for this office?
I've been at the Capitol since 2006. I've been to the Democratic National Convention 2012. I've protested anything that's against the Arizona voters. 8 years just on Social Security. They're still trying to privatize. I've actually protested 3 times in one day by 3 different organizations. What qualifies me is a lot of experience, plus my military experience running. When Tom Cruise filmed Top Gun, I was at Top Gun with 37 F-14s and 325 people. If that doesn't qualify you, I don't know what else is.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, what are you most proud of from your Air Force career?
I think, over 26 years, there are an awful lot of wonderful stories and people that I came in contact with. And I think maybe the most touching one to me is I had a kid, I call him a kid, an airman, who worked for me, who was a computer geek. And I didn't really know much about computers. I was just supposed to. But really, I just needed to know a little bit more than my boss did. That was about it. So I used to pull this kid who was kind of rocky. He was pretty close to being thrown out a couple of times. And I pulled him into my office a few times and asked him to explain some computer thing to me. And I, through that process of sort of mentoring him and making him recognize how wonderful he was, he came up to me after my change of command when I left. He ran out into the parking lot and stopped me as I was leaving the squadron, and he said, "Ma'am, thank you very much for what you did. I really appreciate your assistance, your help, and your mentoring." So that's probably it.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham, why do you not support Planned Parenthood?
Thank you for the question. The preamble of our Constitution says we secure these rights for ourselves and our posterity. Our posterity, capital P. That means it's our children to come after us. So when we talk about a fetus, we talk about a newborn, we talk about an adolescent, talk about an embryo, those are all stages of life. Those are ages. In reality, we are born 9 months old. It's not just a lump of flesh. You can watch on a sonogram. By the way, 78% of the women who have a sonogram who are contemplating an abortion, and this is data that is legit, you can go out and look it up, 78% change their mind. Why? Because they see motion. They see activity. And I'm out of time.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, how do you build relationships with and respond to constituents with different viewpoints from your own?
Well, I do my best to listen to what constituents have to say. I take pride in listening to both sides of the spectrum. Even if I'm ideologically opposed, I will sit down with someone and have a conversation with them, and give them the opportunity to convince me the way they think. And sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But when it comes to issues that I don't have any experience in, that's where I rely on those skills, is to, listen to both sides. Also listen to industry experts on what's going on and, the particular issue that's happening, and that way you can make an educated decision on what's the best way to proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, what is an issue that you feel has not been addressed in LD 11, and what do you plan to do about it?
An issue that has not been addressed in LD 11. Well, I think our roads are something that hasn't been addressed. Well, in Maricopa and hospitals, I think it's a big deal. During my last pregnancy, if something had happened, we would have to travel 45 minutes to get somewhere. So the system of roads in Maricopa is, I guess, similar to this place here. Is you have to get a long ways to go, except in Maricopa we don't have a hospital, so there isn't anything in 24-hour emergency services that we have. So they originally said we needed 50,000 people, and then they said that's not enough. We needed something that was going to make the money in order to build a hospital in Maricopa. So I think that's something that even the legislature needs to address for LD 11, is those communities. What options do they have? And again, this is speaking from this. When I was pregnant with this little guy, I was on bed rest for 4 months. Now he's 10. But even from my husband's, foot surgery, we have to go out of town, everything. So if we could figure out, make sure these hospitals are looking at smaller places as well.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, what is your position regarding state funding of community colleges?
They cut it. We need to increase it. We need, when I came back from Vietnam and was going to college, I found out then that if we have people, and I told my vets this, if we take our community college and you transfer all the core that you have in the community college to a 4-year institution, you cut 1 year off of your education. We have done a disservice for our community college. Our community college, our teachers have master's degrees. In 4-year colleges, they have people with bachelor's degrees working on their master's degree. Which one's going to benefit the student better, a master's degree or a bachelor's degree? There's no choice. Community college is so important to education. We need to start funding it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, in this day and age, social media has provided an easy medium for people to express their opinions. Some not so kind, quite frankly. What do you plan to do to bring civility to Arizona politics?
Oh, wow, those seem like disconnected comments, but I honestly, I think that in general, in the legislature itself, there is civility. You are not allowed to impugn someone else on the floor or during a committee meeting or anything. So there is a fair amount of civility there, and I think that's very, very important. When we came in here tonight, I know we're on kind of what we think of as opposing sides, but we all know each other. We shook hands, we chatted for a few minutes. So I don't think that that side of it is as bad as a lot of people think. Now, social media is kind of a fun thing because people get to hide behind a name and it might not even exist, that person. And I know that that happens, and that's wrong. But I don't think the government ought to be stopping that, at least not at the state level. So I'm sure there ought to be some rules. I'm not really sure what they are, but I don't think Arizona State Legislature has any play in that.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham. One moment. What is your, it is. It
Is it a book?
Regarding your position on the Red for Ed movement, please talk about your position on the Red for Ed movement. There is a perception of dismissiveness, and how do you feel like you are, how will you represent voters in your district who support the Red for Ed movement, given your position?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, if there's a perception of dismissiveness for Red for Ed, I think that's a misperception. I've spoken to well on 40 teachers in the Marana and the Oro Valley school districts, primarily. Unfortunately, they're no longer here because they're off on vacation, so it's kind of tough to track them down. But there seems to be a divide right down the middle. Of the 40, 21 did not support Red for Ed. 19 did. And when I asked them, why did you support it versus why did you not support it, I got two very different answers. Those who said they didn't support it believed that their job was in the classroom to teach, that they knew that there was something in the works between the governor's office and the House, negotiating what could we afford to do, how would we get there, how much growth did we see. I mean, the fact that we're at 7% growth.
Finish your sentence.
Beg pardon?
Finish your sentence.
Oh, thank you. The fact that we're at 7%, 7.2-ish% growth, we projected a number that we were going to try to skate to, that we knew we could afford without getting us over the edge to create a structural imbalance.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, each year Arizona gives away billions of dollars in tax incentives but doesn't pay teachers appropriate wages. What are your thoughts on this?
I think I've already addressed this question in previous comments. Again, I think we all care about education. I think we differ on how we're should and get there. I think the answer to a lot of funding issues is getting our state land the way we should have it. And I'm sorry, I lost track of the question.
Your thoughts on the fact that that teachers are not paid appropriate wages, yet billions of dollars are given away in tax incentives?
I address both of them. Tax incentives, like I said, we have to fear the fact that if we start increasing corporate taxes to the point that those corporations want to leave Arizona, that's going to make us go in reverse as far as economic momentum. As far as teacher pay, I think it's been addressed. Again, we are at the point of funding where essentially we're back at 2008 funding levels. And I think in order to continue to make sure that we have funding for education, we got to get state lands, and so we could broaden that tax base so we don't run into this again in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz, what is your position on requiring police officers to wear body cameras?
Well, before I answer that, I wanted to let Mr. Fincham know that there are Marana teachers in the audience if he wanted to speak to them. And I know one actually communicated with him back and forth during the Red for Ed movement. If you're interested in talking to her, she's right over here. But in any case, again, in reference to the corporate taxes, we said the same thing. The fear was there about raising the minimum wage in Arizona, and the small businesses aren't going out of business. It's still there. So I think we're going to be safe there. But can you repeat the question?
What is your position on requiring police officers to wear body cameras?
Body cameras. Okay. Well, I think there are pros and cons to that. I think that it's something we can explore. If they're not already doing it in Arizona, I think the states who are doing it might have some data on it for us to explore that option. But I think along with the body cameras, maybe we need to be looking at cultural sensitivity training for our police officers. Because teachers, we have to do that, and we work with those kids. We know exactly what's going to set off each one, except a police officer doesn't have those relationships to go off of. So I think that would be a starting point as well.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, What steps would you take legislatively to help combat the ongoing opioid epidemic?
Well, first of all, we started the Angel Network because I have 6 big farmers that decided they want to make a little extra money on and violate our constitutional rights of forced servitude. Second thing is good policies save lives. We haven't got a policy that's going to address that issue. We have doctors that have been forced to do things that violate their doctor's oath. And third thing is get out the information. We have to have people understand the problem with this opiate epidemic has been created, and we need to stop that.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, how would you attempt to address the shortage of doctors as an elected official?
Well, one of the problems with creating doctors, resident programs in medical schools, is that they are funded basically through, or designated basically through Medicare system. And Medicare determines how many residencies there are going to be. That needs to be changed. I mean, basically, the medical schools need to be allowed to open up and train as many residents as they can get in and get back out again with the proper education. So that's really very, very important. I'm sure, I don't really know what they are, but I'm sure there are probably policies at the medical boards and in the medical associations that make it very difficult for some doctors to come here. But we have a terrible shortage of doctors. I can tell you that I had a nurse practitioner. When I was commiserating with her that I couldn't get a primary care manager, she told me she couldn't get a primary care manager either, and she was a nurse practitioner. So we need to do something to get more doctors and medical practitioners in here.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham, what is your position on increasing education and vocational training in Arizona prisons to reduce recidivism?
We're already doing it. In fact, I'm pleased that we're making the progress that we are. Thank you very much for the question. So there is a great, and I would encourage people to go look at the work that's been done in Louisiana. It's a great model where they have a maximum security prison where they have taught everything from ASE mechanic licensure. They have actually brought business into these individuals so that they have work to do. It's not just enough to get an education, you have to be able to practice your craft. So I believe that we've already got, for example, a number of prison fire crews. These guys are learning how to be hotshots on the line. That is a hard job. It's a hard life. But they're learning the skills, and those are the kinds of things that I think are actually helping with our recidivism rate. It's down. We have a constantly declining prison population. And I think a lot of that has to do with we're putting the right people in the right kinds of programs, and we're only keeping those who are the most violent in prison.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, what is your position on the legalization of recreational marijuana?
I'm against it.
Thank you. One moment. Ms. Quiroz, what changes would you recommend to ensure safety in schools and other public places?
I think there needs to be a partnership with local law enforcement and the schools. Maricopa Unified did some exercises over the summer. I wasn't allowed to go into my classroom because of it, but they were running around doing some exercises, and that way they can show us what we should be doing. I think they definitely need to have open communication and have a plan B and a plan C, specifically for us because our high school is within a neighborhood, the high school I teach in. So we would be very limited as to where we can go, what we can do. So I'm glad that they're moving to do that. Another thing is student identification, making sure our students are the ones that are inside the school. So another thing we're doing is we're making sure that our students are wearing their identification around their neck so that we can identify which ones are students, which ones are not.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, what is your position on the Arizona Supreme Court's denial of in-state tuition for DACA?
I disagree with it. Our DACA, when it comes doing immigration since 2008, when it comes to DACA, I'm pushing now dual citizenship. Why should somebody be held hostage for losing an argument with a parent they're only 4 or 5 years old? They came to this country, they only know Arizona, they don't know Mexico. They know what their parents have told them, but then their parents came here because of Bracero bill, and then they didn't leave because there weren't jobs. Why hold our DACA hostage, and why destroy families? So yes, I'm against it.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon, what types of regulations would you recommend regarding gun purchasing and ownership?
Oh, before I answer that, I want to get back to a previous point. All of this school funding that we've been talking about and that we've increased, the legislature increased recently, we're still between $650 and $800 million short of where we were in 2008 before recession, and that's inflation adjusted. So I just want to set that straight. I believe in 3 things, basically, for guns. I think we ought to have universal background checks. I think we need to limit the size of magazines because, I mean, after all, if you only have 9 bullets in a magazine, that's probably enough unless you want to go out and really hurt some people. And we need to increase the availability of and access to mental health providers.
Thank you. And Mr. Fincham, one moment. What do you think can be done what is your thoughts about Arizona capitalizing on solar energy to its best ability?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So Arizona we're in kind of an interesting situation. The state of California is generating so much electricity by solar that they have to sell it to us. And they're selling it at a loss. So while we're the Sunshine State, if you know about the grid, Western grid, electricity is a lot like water. There's one difference. You can't park it in a lake. It's got to have some place to go. It either goes to manufacturing, it might go someplace else. So, we talk about eliminating tax loopholes and subsidies and all that. How about the $27 million we spend every year on solar subsidies? If that were truly a ripe, mature business, taxpayers wouldn't have to pay for electricity twice. We've got a generator that we've already paid for, or at least partly, at Navajo Generating Station. We're going to be saddled with the debt from that for the next 26 years.
Thank you. At this time, we will move to our closing remarks, and the first closing statement will be given by Mr. Roberts. Please.
Thank you. Once again, thank everybody for coming out. Thank you, Clean Elections, for putting on this debate. A little bit about my background. I have a very diverse background. I think the reason why I would be a good legislator is because I've done quite a few different things in my short number of years. I'm 45, about to be 46, and I've done quite a few different things, from owning a small business to working in jails for Sheriff Joe, to driving a tractor trailer, to several different things. I'm a licensed real estate agent. I've been in the mortgage industry. So I think with these different hats that I've had, that I've done, each of them long enough to have a firm grasp on them industries, that I will be able to look at a lot of different issues from a lot of different perspectives, where I'm not pigeonholed into having done one particular thing for my entire life. So I've done stuff in the government sector, I've done stuff in the private sector. And I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quiroz?
Well, I gave you guys my story about why I decided to run. I really hope that we have a lot of teachers out there listening, because these are your options. I try to get as many to come as possible, and I'm glad that those of you that are here. Thank you for coming, and hopefully you take back what you can and let everybody know how it works. But in any case, I am running to fully fund education, not until 2020, I mean, for always, and for our bus drivers and for our paraprofessionals who have to sometimes change diapers. They can't be getting paid $10, $11 an hour. We need to increase that as well. In fact, my textbooks are over 12 years old. My heart breaks every time I see those big road signs for some of the people up here that are maybe over $100 a piece, and that's a lot of money being spent. You won't see my signs out there though, not yet at least. I'm a Clean Elections candidate, and I'm still collecting $5 donations. So if you can help with that, I would appreciate it. That'll help me get my stuff out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCain?
Thank you, everyone, for coming here, and thank you, Clean Elections. I always run clean. We have technology. I didn't realize until I got out of the military just how advanced I was. For example, I know nuclear warfare. I was tested on it every 6 months. I know navigation because that's one of my specialties. As far as our voters, as I said to the union, I'm union president, or officer, is that empathy makes communities, and communities make a country. We need to reverse what we've been hearing and back it with fact. If we want to represent somebody, then, and that's exactly what we're supposed to do, represent you, the voters, and you're the number one reason for this country. Without the voters, we won't have the country. The people hasn't been addressed, and that's why I'm running for office, because all my military experience, medically able to represent the disabled people, plus a lot registered lobbyists, we need to help the people.
Thank you. Ms. Lyon?
Well, again, thanks to everyone for coming out. This has been fabulous to see all the smiling faces and intense looks. I look at it like the state government has basically three primary responsibilities. One of them is to pass a budget, and it has to be a balanced budget by law. The second one is to fund education. That's in the Constitution, fully fund education. And the third one is, of course, to keep our citizens safe. And safety goes in a lot of different directions. That can be with planning for water, for roads, for all kinds of infrastructure that's needed, and good infrastructure. And I don't feel like our legislature has been performing the first one, the budget part, well enough to do the others. And I'd like to go up there and figure out where all that money is so we can start doing the things that we need to do with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fincham?
Thank you very much. I have truly appreciated the opportunity to serve the constituents of Legislative District 11 now for 4 years. I hope that you will return me to office for 2 more years. We have, I think, turned a corner on a lot of things, and the proof is in the pudding. 7.5% growth, ranked number 5 in all of the United States for economic opportunity and momentum. We've got wages that are rising faster than any other state. That is an outcome of good public policy. As far as pots of money that are hidden, I would love to have somebody come up and help me find them, because they aren't there. So that's not an endorsement for Holly Lyon. But I do appreciate the opportunity to serve, and you know, the idea that there is no civility in government, I want to dispel that right now. I've had the opportunity to work with some really good people, and the whole truth is that not everybody has good ideas. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Greens, they all have ideas, but roughly 2/5 of those ideas are non-starters. Thank you.
Thank you. To all of our candidates, we thank you so much for participating in our forum. And to our audience members, we thank all of you who took time to come and inform yourselves before voting. We encourage you to visit www.azcleanelections.gov voter dashboard for a customized experience to find information on the primary election, the candidates, the issues, and to view this debate on demand. Please do fill out the debate evaluation form and return it to one of our volunteers. Your feedback is important to the commission and will help improve future debates. Thank you all for coming tonight, and you're welcome to stay and speak directly with the candidates. Have a great evening.